I'm still sitting in the same place with the fans just raging. If it sounds like there's a roar or whoosh of electronic water passing in the background like a river, uh, it's fans. I'm in Tampa, Florida, uh, and feverish from the broken tooth, half starved, can't get up to get shit done. Hell no, I'm not turning off the fans. I might just fall out from some kind of fit here and now if I turn off the fucking fans. So you'll just have to put up with that noise if it's there, or maybe I'll delete the video after I post it. So, 80s movies. Today, when I realized I was going to be able to walk around the room and eat a meal, I had the internet find me a bootleg copy of the 1980 Rankin Bass television premiered animated feature, The Return of the King. Adapted from Tolkien, part of his Lord of the Rings trilogy. This is a really odd and big subject for me. I'm a really pretty obsessive fan of Tolkien, the writer. I'm not even sure if that's really the right way to put it. I'm an obsessive fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I've read that novel, or those three novels, depending on how you want to look at it, over and over again since I was 7 or 8 years old. And I don't know the date on this, but I started reading them weirdly young because of the first Rankin Bass animated TV movie, The Hobbit. I was in first or second grade. And my mother was mentally ill in such a way that she didn't really interact with me informatively. Like, you know, I remember the first time I ever heard anything about race or religion. I remember the first time I had God mentioned to me. Also, I had to be instructed when I was 7 or 8 years old that you have to knock on people's doors before you walk in, because that's how out of touch my mother was with reality and in terms of like raising a kid. So it might seem a little weird that I didn't know about these books despite being, I think I must have been 7 or 8 years old. I definitely was, it was after first grade, that movie, The Hobbit, premiered on TV. But I remember the credits rolling at the end, seeing it for the first time. I was 7, 8, 9 years old, something like that. And saying out loud, I wish there was more to that story. And my mother said there is. In fact, there's 3 more books. And they're right over there, and she pointed to the shelf. So I walked over and looked. Yeah, paperback copy of The Hobbit, and paperback copies of 3 more. Same author, all of them thicker. And this was the edition with the weirdly sort of abstract art on the covers. Like, you would not have been able to tell these were supposed to be some kind of epic or heroic fantasy literature at all from these covers. And I remember looking over the whole 2 bookcases. My mother didn't have much that I found readable at that age in her bookcases. She was in school. She studied acting. From the books, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of psychology. Nothing with pictures, even on the covers. Probably 2 dozen books that were fiction, maybe. More like a dozen. But I promptly read her copies of Lord of the Rings to pieces. And read them over and over again. I don't quite read them continuously, like a Bible fanatic with a Bible, but it's close. I'm in the middle of them right now, sorta. So look, the second Rankin Bass TV animated movie is not really very good in most ways. The first one they made, The Hobbit, I think is spectacular. I think the best Tolkien screen adaptation is Ralph Bakshi's animated feature, Lord of the Rings, from 1978, I think. Script for that was by Peter Beagle, the novelist who wrote The Last Unicorn. Rankin Bass later made a movie of The Last Unicorn, also from a script by Beagle. Um, these these Peter Jackson Tolkien movies, what, there's six now? I haven't seen the TV show they just made a year or two ago, Rings of Power or whatever it's called. I I don't hate the Jackson movies. Um, they're really shallow in terms of intellectual engagement, understanding the texts they're based on, even just adapting carefully. They burned right past setting stuff up in the first two movies of the first trilogy that basically left them with nothing to use for half of the third one. It really seemed to me like they didn't even flip through the books enough to notice that the third novel is considerably shorter. It just has a bunch of appendices. Uh, Before they started cutting big plot elements of the third novel because they hadn't set the shit up in their first movie. Um, so they just did like 30 extra scenes of Sam telling Frodo to buck up, little trooper, keep climbing up the staircase. Like a lot of those scenes. Like I don't remember anything else about that movie really. I mean, Peter Jackson, Meet the Feebles is one of my favorite movies. I saw Heavenly Creatures on the big screen when it opened. Another great movie. The Frighteners is a great movie. But he's essentially, a dumb guy stoner. Makes dumb guy stoner movies. And Heavenly Creatures has some depth, meaning, somewhat. I mean, in certain directions. It's about real things. His Lord of the Rings movies are not. And they're not even really about Tolkien a lot of the time. They're really reductive, simple-minded. He clearly is fit to make the best monster movies of our generation. And it's a shame that the way the machinery works now means what he did for the investors making those 6 Lord of the Rings movies didn't repay him with creative freedom. If anything, the opposite. Trapped him into making more movies that take advantage of his genius for expanding his background in puppets into multiple unit effects work and how to understand how to stage it convincingly. His aesthetic, like I said, he's sort of the ultimate stoner, playing to the stoners in the gallery. Visually, his movies are always good. But whatever it is Peter Jackson should be doing on his best day, in his best movies, should be happening right now, and it ain't. They're not letting him. And I'm personally convinced that they intentionally sabotaged Lovely Bones and the one with the rolling cities. They don't want him to do things they don't want him to do. And it's a shame. And like I said, even so, Return of the King, the 1980 animated movie, it is a train wreck in a lot of ways. But it's got atmosphere. It's got, the music works. It's got great songs. Everyone remembers Where There's a Whip, There's a Way. And Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom, whatever that song is called. The Ballad of Frodo. Something like that. The design is really evocative for me. I don't know how much it's because it's my own childhood. I still think it's better than the Peter Jackson movies. They just lack a sense of wonder and understanding of the magic and the hidden depths lurking behind the the front level first reading of the text in Lord of the Rings. Um, it's very easy now to misunderstand that all of adult heroic fantasy of this kind is basically a sort of a subgenre of boys' adventure novels, like Treasure Island kind of shit. More appeal to the girls, a little more appeal to adults. Genre wants to expand sideways into stuff like Game of Thrones or uh, but and the idea that the kids these days who like fantasy have that world building, that creating a convincing fantasy world for your little bullshit heroic boys adventure story to play out against, it is really important. And that your little bullshit boys adventure story, the plot is everything. You should plot 10,000 pages worth of action. Tolkien clearly got away with a paucity of character development. But the things that are clever and rich and wild and weird and wonderful in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy are subtle and best reveal themselves on multiple readings over a long period of time. And I think that complexity in that text is basically the only real way Tolkien shows in that work that he was a devout and devoted Christian, because the Bible also has that kind of hidden depths in it. Yeah, and I don't think there's any way a movie could ever really capture most of that. It just ain't fit for filming, which is what Walt Disney said about it. I've seen and read the memo. I don't remember it to quote it verbatim, but Uncle Walt, the greatest fantastic filmmaker who ever lived, and the greatest animator, at least his team, Snow White and forwards, he had readers scouring the published literature for things he could develop into animated features. And his team of roving readers brought him Tolkien, The Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings. And he did write a memo about it, saying they're brilliant novels, and that there's just no way to ever adapt them for the screen that would ever do them any kind of justice or even work well as movies. I don't remember the details of what Walt said, but I think he was basically correct. The fact that they seem to be fit to make movies of says a lot about how really engaging Tolkien's prose is, how really present his descriptions become when describing action. Doesn't make novels any more actually cinematic. They're not cinematic at all. I mean, not at all. Dude. No. So was that? Am I recommending The Return of the King from 1980, the Rankin Bass movie? I guess so. It's an animated trilogy, really. The guys making these movies did think of themselves as standing in the shadow of each other. The Rankin Bass Company and Ralph Bakshi and his team, totally separate, no interaction between them, but they were answering each other. So The Hobbit is the first one. Ralph Bakshi's theatrical feature, The Lord of the Rings, is aware that The Hobbit happened and operates like it's a sequel to that. And the TV movie, The Return of the King, that premiered in 1980, Rankin Bass, following their own movie, The Hobbit. Again, they were more than aware that there was an animated theatrical feature in between and that they're adapting what's left. So functionally, it's a trilogy. And I would watch them that way. The third one's the weak one, Return of the King. Definitely the weak one. On the other hand, it has Where There's a Whip, There's a Way. And that really is one of the best songs ever written for any screen musical, honestly. So yeah, I recommend you watch all three of them in that order. The Rankin Bass Hobbit, and then the Bakshi Lord of the Rings, and the 1980 Return of the King. And in that context, and compared to the Jackson movies, Yeah, I don't know. It ain't great, but it ain't a disappointment either. I'm still watching it and enjoying it. And I first saw it premiere on TV when I was, what, 9, 10 years old? I had a little sister who was so terrified by that movie's Gollum that I could just make her run screaming by imitating Gollum. I don't know, 6 months, a year. My mom had to tell me to stop, tell you that.